Hello everyone. As you guys probably know by now, Wuthering Wave's second CBT was finally announced this January, and we can now register for it until the 7th of February. So with that in mind, in this occasion, we decided to do a recap of all the major points of CBT1, be it positive or negative, whilst comparing them with all the content changes that has been revealed to us in the recent Kura Game Devs interview. So let's find out. So to start off with, here are some of the negative impressions that was left in CBT1. The first example of this was the camera. Now, whether you've played CBT1 or not, a lot of people have experienced camera movement. One of the examples of this was how there was a lot of unnecessary panning to obstructed views, especially when using shorter characters against taller enemies. The next thing was the audio and translation issues. There was a lot of poorly directed character voice lines, dialogues with mistranslations, and missing text, which had impacted the overall narrative experience for the game. Now, in terms of visuals, a lot of people were not satisfied with the world's color palette, where it seemed a bit too dull and unappealing. There was a lot of debate surrounding this, especially with comparisons to games like Nier and Death Stranding. However, with a world like Wuthering Waves, where the world is just starting to heal, none of the areas had stood out whatsoever. Next, we look into the exploration side of things. This was heavily criticized for being very uninteresting, too many pointless chests scattered around with very little rewards alongside. A lot of notable landmarks were very scarce, so a lot of this contributed to a very lackluster exploration experience. Along with that problem comes with material scarcity as well. There was just a lot of significant scarcity of resources, especially with echoes and character experiences. The material to stamina ratio, even at higher union levels, was perceived as unfavorable. With that in mind, let's talk about endgame loops. There was a lot of complaints with things such as co-op mode feeling extremely bare bones, limited activities, and a perceived lack of depth in the game's final stages. Now for the big elephant in the room. The gacha system. With a 50-50 chance of getting a character and a 90 pity system, this received extreme criticism, especially when people drew a lot of parallels with Genshin Impact, expressing dissatisfaction with its influence on Wuthering Waves. All in all though, let's talk about the positive side of things. The combat. Despite whatever criticism there was told, there was a widespread agreement that the combat system was excellent, fast-paced, dynamic, and engaging. The game had offered a variety of character combinations for effective team building. The next big one was the ecosystem. This system had allowed a lot of depth for the combat system itself, where it would allow players to use defeated monsters for quick support or quick damage, or provide specific buffs that could help them in combat as well. The game had a lot of praise for its smooth traversal system, where running around would not consume any kind of stamina. You had features like wall running, extremely fluid parkour movements, and a grappling tool that was helped for seamless exploration. Another thing that was highly praised was the graphics. Kura Games was able to effectively utilize with Unreal Engine 4, providing Wuthering Waves with realistic and high quality graphics. Lastly, the game soundtrack, most likely produced in collaboration with Vanguard Sound Studio, received high praise. Whether it's in the city or intense battles, the music seamlessly blended with the game's atmosphere. All in all, at the conclusion of CBT1, Kura Games addressed player feedback in a review. Commitments included improving the storyline, cutscene presentation, localization, game art, gameplay aspects such as combat experience, the ecosystem, and the modulation system, which is the gacha, and finally the tutorials. With that said though, let's look into the improvements that's been made now. Starting with the overall design. One of the major complaints was the environmental design. Kura took notes with that feedback and has made it their priority, and it shows. From the lighting, the vibrancy, whilst maintaining the heavy post-apocalyptic nature, the world of Wuthering Waves is simply gorgeous. On top of that, they have also implemented a new atmospheric system and a weather change, which should make different areas stand out more from each other. Lastly, we also noticed the changes with the character models and the design for some of them. The biggest change that they've actually put out was the story. As hard as it is to hear, the storyline for Wuthering Waves simply felt weak. so it wasn't surprising to hear them rework the story. However, we did not expect them to rework 90% of it, which is an insane amount considering the amount of assets that would be lost in the process as well. We can now only hope that the story will feel a lot better now and a lot more coherent this time around. Now the next one was the open world content. While not going into too much details for this, some content that has been added to the game, such as a challenge with higher difficulty, thank you Kuro, granting special echoes, and whilst we don't have any idea of what that echo could be or do, it's not surprising that if it's tied with a new shiny-like system, similar as to Pokemon. Additionally, the task field will also receive random buffs which should vary the fighting experience whilst doing them. Next up, let's talk about the new combat edition that might boost the usage of echo skills to a whole new level. During boss fights, certain echoes will now trigger a red flash on the boss's position, which indicates that they have a move that could be parried by a certain echo. We are thinking that this feature will be incredibly useful for the more casual players who have not had that much combat experience with games like PGR, action RPGs, or Souls-like, etc. With less experience, it might feel quite overwhelming for new players. So hopefully, by timing echo skills, this can help casual players defeat bosses a lot more easily. Retaining players of all skill levels is important for the game's success, while still adding a little bit more depth to the echoes too. So we are quite excited for more features like this. Lastly, on the topic of combat system, the concerted effect system has now been reworked and it's now called concerted skills. Instead of a fixed reaction like based on element combined type of system, each character gets their own unique concerted skill, which works like concerted effects. You go through a process of accumulating enough concerted energy to trigger a QTE swap, which unlocks the swapped character's unique concerted skill effect. And the character you swap to, similarly to CBT1, would perform an attack that might come with additional benefits with their kit, like how Tauki gains 2 stacks to a resonance chain. We still don't have a lot of official information on the system outside of a few translated descriptions from the G-Star build that was held in South Korea, but we do have a little bit of an idea on how these concerted skills will look like. However, at the same time, we cannot give our exact thoughts on it just yet. Overall, what came as a surprise was that they felt the need to rework the previous concerted effect system, which was quite liked by us and many during CBT1's feedback. It promoted good team building structure whilst also giving a fair chance to everyone, as they all shared the same concerted effects as long as the elemental combination was the same, so the flexibility was quite high. We'll have to see how this turns out in CBT2 though. Finally, let's talk about the ecosystem. This system has gone through quite a few changes overall that make it much friendlier towards the player. First, let's go over with how it was in CBT1 and explain a few of its problems. When defeating enemies in the world, there is a small chance that they would drop an echo. Basically, as long as you have enemies in your world that you can defeat, you can endlessly farm them for echoes, which you can equip for additional stats and skills. The advantage of it, of course, is being able to farm enemies quite a lot until you get the desired echoes. However, there are people who may not always have enough spare time to farm echoes by fighting tacit discords. Additionally, it felt like there was a lack of XP materials to level up those echoes, which you could only get that XP through using your daily stamina, which counteracts being able to endlessly farm echoes as you weren't able to level up as fast as you would acquire them. The new echo system tackles the issue of having to fight enemies in order to acquire echoes by allowing players to challenge tacit fields, which have specifically assigned echoes and XP materials as claimable rewards using stamina, which is your daily currency. Now players don't have to spend as much time to acquire echoes for their characters. As for equipping those echoes, the players will still want to match echoes of the same attribute in order to gain different echo set effects. Those set effects grant your character a sizable increase in stats and effects that can vary from different sets. For example, we already know that there is a set which increases your party's attack after getting healed by the set wearer. Additionally, now the game limits the player for up to 12 echo points to spend on their equipped echoes. But what does that mean? Different echo types, which are based on enemy types, will cost a different amount of echo points, between 1, 3, and 4 for highest rarity, common, elite, or boss. Each type of echo can grant different main stats, and every echo, while not specific to types, can grant up to 5 substats. Compared to previous beta tests, every echo had its main stats and 4 substats. The players would choose which echo grants its main stat, whilst the rest only grants their substats. When leveling up an Echo, its main stats and the first 2 substats will increase, but the last 3 substats won't. So making sure those subsets are desirable for your player is going to be important for improving your character strength by a lot. In CBT1, each Echo had its own unique Echo skill. However, in CBT2, it seems like some of the Echo skills can change based on the player's action, like when you're in mid-air. This creates a much more interesting and creative approach for the Echo skill usage. This is taken to a whole new level when the new mechanics for bosses which allow for specific boss attacks to become parryable with specific Echo skills, which is indicated by flashing a red light on the boss you're fighting. Similarly to CBT1, your main equipped Echo will decide on your Echo skill, so plan accordingly to what you would need. Last thing to talk about is a new feature that introduces shiny echoes into the game. Just like shiny Pokemons, you have a rare chance to acquire a special looking shiny echo. As far as of now, shiny echoes will only look different, but do not actively change on how the game is played. This gives players more incentives to roam around the world, come back to explore areas, defeating random echoes to feel rewarded when they finally find that specific shiny echo that they've always wanted to flex on their friends with. If you've reached this far, thank you so much for watching. Please hit that like button if you've enjoyed the video through, and subscribe for more potential upcoming content.